What do you think about ayahuasca? People who take it say it is a being, an entity that is communicating with you and a healing entity.
We also consider ayahuasca as a divine being, the ayahuasca as a sentient being, as a being with conscience, with agency, with intent that can teach, that can discipline, that can heal. You have some depression and you're going to a session with a shaman and he says, oh, you're not depressed. It was just evil spirit that was possessing you, but I scared it. I removed it, What can Western medicine do with that form of knowledge? Nothing, because they don't want to acknowledge anything outside the material physical realm. Psychedelics have helped a lot of people with terminal diseases in coping, in understanding, their process, in finding peace, in finding acceptance. And that can be also seen as a form of healing. Sometimes healing can come without curing the illness.
Welcome back to the Kotodama Podcast. Over here, we explore the mystical. And my guest today is Henrique Antunes. I hope I'm saying the name correctly. He's an Ayahuasca Community Committee Coordinator at the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. Welcome, Henrique.
Hello, a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes. So basically, I think you have a PhD, or I don't know. You do, you work in this Chacruna Institute. So can you tell me and my viewers a little bit about what you do exactly there?
Yes, I started working at the Chacruna Institute late 2023 as the Ayahuasca Community Committee Coordinator. Currently, I am also the research director at the Institute, and we promote education, harm reduction. We teach courses, we do community forums, we publish articles, books. We don't sell psychedelics. There's nothing like that. We're not a church, we're not a group, we're a nonprofit, a grassroots nonprofit that works on educating the general public and doing harm reduction and helping to promote the cause of psychedelics, especially focus on indigenous practices and BIPOC groups. And also we have a lot of people from the global south, from Mexico, from Brazil. So we are kind of a global, although the NGO is based in San Francisco in California. We like to consider ourselves a voice from the global south. Bia Labate, the co-founder and executive director, is a brilliant Brazilian anthropologist who's been living in the US for a while. So we try to be a different voice in this landscape, which is very pretty much dominated by psychedelic science and the focus on psychedelic medicine. So we're trying to focus on cultural aspects and other issues that are also important. And just to a quick note, we'll have our yearly conference in April, mid-April, in San Francisco at the Brava Theater, called Psychedelic Culture. For those who are based in California or in the US, if you want to check it out, it's an awesome event, conference, dozens of speakers, hundreds of people attending, critical conversations, and a lot of knowledge going on.
Okay, thank you for that intro. So that's so interesting. I, recently actually uploaded a clip from one of my episodes on Instagram and it went viral. It's still going viral, where my guest talked a little bit about psychedelics and what it does to your brain. And, people seem to be really affected by or triggered positively and negatively by the whole topic of psychedelics. And I have so many ideas and thoughts. But I want to ask you first. So, what do you think about ayahuasca? People who take it say it is a a being, an entity that is communicating with you, and a healing entity. Other people are saying it's just, it's just something, that you make up in your mind, and it's not really, it's just a plant. So what do you think about this?
First, I like to start saying that I'm a part of a Brazilian ayahuasca religion called Santo Daime. I've been a member of this religious group for 20 years now, a little over 20 years. I drank ayahuasca. Ayahuasca has a lot of names depending on the context. Indigenous context, religious context, it can be called Uni, Capi, Nishipan, Santo Daime, Oasca, vegetal, depending on the tradition, the name will change, the method of harvesting and cooking will change. So I first experienced ayahuasca in the Santo Daime context. As I said, it's a Brazilian ayahuasca religion founded in 1930. And so it's almost a century old now. And in the Santo Daime tradition, we also consider ayahuasca as a divine being. We don't consider it as a drug, as a molecule, as a DMT, as a chemical substance that we just take and alter our brain chemistry and produces hallucinations. So it's a very in certain this aspect very close to a lot of indigenous traditions as well that talk about what we call plant agency. The ayahuasca as a sentient being, as a being with conscience, with agency, with intent, that can teach, that can discipline, that can heal. So from my perspective, that's how I approach it. But I know that a lot of the scientists and people researching the therapeutic use of ayahuasca, they're more interested in how ayahuasca affects, the brain chemistry and how the chemical effects, even though this notion of effects is not something that we use on Santo Daime, because effect is something related to a chemical substance, the effect of an active ingredient. So we in Santo Daime, we say that, are you feeling the force or not? It's something that it's not something that it's necessarily inside the tea, but sometimes we feel that something is coming from the outside, as really a sentient being, a divine being. It's hard to find words to properly describe the ayahuasca experience.
Yeah, I personally have never done ayahuasca or any psychedelics for that matter. I just have never been feeling called to it yet. Who knows? One day maybe I will do it. I'm open, but I am absolutely not a scientist or any logical thinker. I think nothing makes sense in the best way possible. I think life is magical, and I believe everything is a sentient being, actually, even a table. So I might be like on the other spectrum of what most scientists think about. Like, I'm very esoteric. My viewpoint is esoteric, not exoteric. So I believe everything you're saying. And I have heard also from people in my life a little bit about the positive effects of ayahuasca on their health. So, for example, I have heard some people say, whether in documentaries or in personal interactions that I've had with people, for example, who were addicted to alcohol, and then they did one ceremony with ayahuasca and they've never touched alcohol again. Or, people who were, on the suicidal side, and then they did ayahuasca and it kind of healed them back to, falling back in love with life. So I've heard very positive things about it too. What would you say, I mean, from your personal experience, maybe if you want to share a little bit also in the church that you're part of, you said already it's hard to explain ayahuasca, but how would you explain the being? I think they call it Mother Aya, and what kind of positive effect did it have on you personally?
Yeah, for me, it was very important. It changed my life in a lot of aspects, but I never had like this miracle healing that suddenly changed my life, from just after a ceremony. It's been a constant learning process. Let me put it like this, So I've been to in 20 years. It's like a marriage, It's has a lot of ups and downs and stages. In the beginning, everything is super great, and you're feeling overwhelmed, and ayahuasca is gonna heal the world, and you want everybody to try it. And then after a while, you reach a plateau, and things become kind of okay. This is just a church. I've been through stages, difficult stages in my life for personal reasons, where it helped me a lot. And for me personally now, it's my life. It's just what I do, and I after I can say that it helps me. It calms me down. It helps me to have a different perspective in life. It helps me to not to take work so seriously, not to take life so seriously, to know that there are different things going on. There's a spiritual life that's almost always happening as well, not to be totally focused and become a workaholic, or not to fall in some ego trips. But ayahuasca can also be a little tricky. You can fall on the other side of the trap, and you feel like you're evolving because you're drinking ayahuasca, and now you're just this saint, or this guru, because you're drinking ayahuasca. So there's also a professor friend of mine, Edward McRae, said, the illusion of ayahuasca. Notice that the ayahuasca creates those illusions, but it's very often you see people that try ayahuasca, they feel, "Hi, I have a calling. Ayahuasca told me that I need to heal the world, that I need to open a church," not trying to diminish other people's experiences, but that is common. When I started, I also thought that I had a mission, that I was going to heal the world, that I was going. And sometimes, it's hard to discern, what is a message from ayahuasca and what is our kind of ego talking, our expectations and things like that. So it's not easy to interpret, the signs, but sometimes the signs are very clear. And regarding the healing, I also had some problems with substance abuse. I never had to go to rehab or anything like that. But as a youngster, as a young man, I dabbled with multiple substances, and ayahuasca helped me, to get my life back on track. And I know a lot of people in Santo Daime that had drug abuse problems, addictions to especially cocaine, crack, and they gave up, those addictions, and eventually became part of Santo Daime. So that there is a lot of truth in what you're saying. There's a lot of stories of people changing their lives, giving up substance abuse, giving up other, toxic behaviors, changing their lives. This is a very real thing. And now ayahuasca is being researched to treat depression, anxiety, PTSD, and also drug abuse. So there's a lot of potential there. But I always like to say that ayahuasca's healing potential goes beyond those psychological or psychiatrical disorders. I'm actually part of a church called Pronto Socorro Raimundo Irineu Serra. Raimundo Irineu Serra is the founder of Santo Daime. And Pronto Socorro, if you would translate to English, it would be emergency room. Emergency room, Raimundo Irineu Serra. So it's like a church hospital, something like that. Because back in the day when Master Irineu, he's from the northeast of Brazil, but he founded the religion in Acre. And his church, his center, his house was in the outskirts of Rio Branco. There were no roads, just dirt roads, and during the rain season it can get really difficult to get to there. Now we have, asphalt buses and everything. It's super easy to go there to visit, Mestre Irineu's original church. But back then it was super difficult. If you were healthy, it was difficult, and if you were sick, it was almost impossible to get there. So he always had someone in the city of Rio Branco that was responsible for the emergency room. If someone was sick in need for a healing, in need of a healing work, and my padrinho's father, Wilson Carneiro, was in charge from 65 until his death in 1998 of the emergency room. So he did a lot of healing works. And back in the day, Santo Daime was used for all kinds of diseases and illnesses, not only even because there was no depression back then. Those I'm not saying that people didn't get depressed, but these are kind of like more modern diseases or illnesses that let's say were discovered and treated more seriously over the last decades. But in the beginning of Santo Daime, a lot of people went for multiple reasons. For instance, my padrinho's son, he started going to Santo Daime because his son was very sick, very ill. He was about to die. Nobody could figure out what he had. He went to every doctor available in Rio Branco. He went to the hospital. He went to African Brazilian religions, to Spiritist Kardecist religions, to all priests, all the doctors available in town, and nobody could figure out what his son had. He was super ill. He was getting worse and worse to the point that he didn't have the strength to stand up by himself. So his father had to carry him in his arms to Mestre Irineu's center, to Mestre Irineu's church. And he drank daime, and at the same night he walked home healed. And there's a lot of also stories of people going through spiritual surgeries in the Santo Daime ritual ceremony, people seeing like spiritual doctors coming, cutting them open, performing surgeries, removing the disease, sewing them back, doing blood transfusions while they were during the work. And when they wake up from this vision, they were healed. So although I really respect and I think that it's important, the research on ayahuasca for PTSD, depression, anxiety, as I say, the psychiatric, psychological disorders, I feel that the potential healing of ayahuasca goes beyond that. It has, and when we only focus on this kind of clinical aspects, medical and effects and things like that, we lose sight of kind of this magical miracle healings that used to happen a lot back in the day. And so ayahuasca has this potential. As I said, it's not something that happens every day. But back in Master Irineu's time, there was a lot of stories, a lot of people that were healed from multiple illnesses, physical diseases with Santo Daime.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting what you're saying, because I think we look at in the modern medicine, in the Western medicine, although it has a lot of good things, I think, especially when it comes to surgeries, I think Western medicine is really great and all of that stuff. Like, I don't want to say it's all bad or all good either, but I think what Western medicine doesn't see at all is that everything is spiritual. So I see it like every physical, I guess, manifestation of an illness has a spiritual root cause, an emotional root cause, like a root cause that is not necessarily physical first. So I can see how ayahuasca or, plant medicines, psychedelic medicines could heal that because they go to the root cause. To my understanding, ayahuasca seems to go to the root cause, to the root trauma, to the root issue. And I do healing as well, like shadow work and healing without any medicines, but I do the same. I go to the root cause. And so I have seen myself how going to the root cause and untethering something and changing something from the root can change physical symptoms too, or get rid of them. So I have seen that with in my own experience. I can 100% believe that, and how it makes sense to me how that works. But so what do you think about other psychedelic medicines, such as I think iboga, or I don't even know how kambo, and all of these other? Am I even saying it correctly? I'm not sure. But what do you think about these other plant medicines?
I don't have much. I've never tried iboga. I've done kambo, not a lot, maybe half a dozen to a dozen times. Never done peyote. A little experience with mushrooms, but I think when we consider those, and kambo is not a plant medicine. It comes from a frog. But let's say the traditional plant medicines, they work, I think, differently from the patterns of Western medicine, and that's in Chacruna is something that I say a lot, because in the psychedelic, let's say, ecosystem or landscape, there's always this notion, we need to integrate Western medicine and traditional knowledge, and everybody supports it, and it's super pretty, and everybody, is behind it. Nobody's gonna say no, but I don't think people really consider the implications and the differences between Western medicine and traditional forms of knowledge. And I'm not, just to make something clear, I'm not against Western medicine. On the contrary, if I have a flu or anything, I take medicine. If I need to, I go to the hospital. I think that all help is welcome. I think the psychedelic universe is very broad. It has room for psychedelic science, for psychedelic assisted therapy, for traditional uses, indigenous uses, religious uses, even psychonauts, recreational uses. I am very against the prohibition and the impacts it has on, especially on BIPOC traditional populations, the stigma, the incarceration, the prisons, the historical trauma, the persecution, the violence. So I anti-prohibitionist, but I really do consider the implications. I think Western medicine is based on certain notions, of diseases, of what is a disease, bacteria, viruses, chemical imbalances, and they always want to go and treat the symptoms and address, and one of the features is always try to make people suffer the less possible. Let's remove the illness, in the more the in a comfortable way, where people will not feel any side effects, where they're not gonna feel anything. So that's the root, to avoid pain, to avoid, stress, to avoid discomfort, and to eliminate the symptoms, to treat the disease. And I feel that in traditional forms of healing, sometimes healing is a journey. It's not something that it can be done easily. You have to go through hardships, you have to go through some sort of pain to see the roots of your illness, to go through this process of cleaning, to have some form of understanding of what was going on, changing some life habits. So it's not something that it has the same like clear cut path as Western medicine. And at the same time, I also feel that there are some different notions, because, for instance, if you go, let's say, a hypothetical scenario, you go treat you have some, you don't know, depression or anything like, or something like that, and you're going to a session with a shaman, and he says, oh, you're not depressed, it was just a evil spirit that was possessing you, but I scared it, I removed it. What can Western medicine do with that form of knowledge? Nothing, because they don't want to acknowledge, anything outside the material physical realm. Although they can go on, like, quantum physics and all those complex talks, but they don't have room for spiritual healing. for spiritual diseases. And in a lot of, for instance, indigenous traditions, they consider that, okay, we have the Western illnesses, let's say the white people illnesses that are caused by virus, bacteria, infections, and things like that. But we also have spiritual diseases. Maybe we did something that, insulted a spirit or a guardian of a certain place, and then we became ill. So even the notion of spiritual disease is something that Western medicine cannot fathom, cannot consider. So I think, although at the same point Western medicine could be more humble and recognize, that traditional forms of knowledge are not folklore, that they have efficacy, they are, and they're a real form of knowledge. But I think this debate, this intersection between Western medicine and traditional forms of healing can only go so far. Sometimes they like oil and water, they don't mix, and Western science don't have the tools to understand the traditional forms of healing, spiritual diseases, plants being agents, plants, having conscience and healing and going inside of you and showing the roots of your disease and showing what you did wrong and how to make you feel better. So I think, although some debates are very interesting, I'm very skeptical about this magical encounter and this romance between Western science and traditional of healing.
I love how you laid that down. Yes. Yes. I when you talked perfect how you explain that, because when you talk about how Western medicine and modern pharmaceuticals are just basically focused on easing the pain, I personally think about that so often because when I have a headache, right? Like that's something everyone can relate to. When you have a headache and I'm sitting there and I'm like, the pain is so shit. Of course, now I would like to take a painkiller. And sometimes I do, right? If sometimes I'm thankful and I'm like, I can't take it right now. I have to do this thing and I can't, whatever it is, even like period cramps for women or, some pain is just so horrible. You just want to get it done. Like you just want the pain to ease. And I 100% get that. But then another part of me, and it depends on which kind of mindset I'm in, but another part of me is like, wait, like the headache is trying to tell me something. If I just take away the pain, now there is no connection anymore between my body and my psyche, or my spiritual body. Like basically my body there's a reason why I have this headache. So whether that's, dehydration or, lack of boundaries, stress situations, maybe it's just whatever it is, right? It can be anything, but there's a reason for that. So instead of really, I guess solving that problem, we're just putting a band-aid on the problem. Like it does nothing. And then next time, let's say maybe it's different with a headache, but let's say you have a chronic issue, maybe a chronic headache. Then, okay, what do you do now? Do you every time just put the pain, like take the painkiller and, get rid of the symptom that's your body trying to talk to you? This is my issue with Western medicine as well. It's so not holistic. So, and plant medicine, it seems like, and all of these traditional shamanic, and indigenous healing modalities are so holistic in their nature, right? Like they look at the whole system, they look at the whole problem, they look at the specific being that they have in front of them. So I see what you're saying, how it doesn't mix well as well, and that makes sense to me. I do think though that maybe one day, I do believe one day science will be there where it will be an intersection, not just intersection, but they will prove all these esoteric concepts that that have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And I think they will prove it one day with science, but I think we're not there yet. So I think right now, it just, as you said, it's like it's not a good romance between these two. It's a different way of looking at it, right? It's like trying to put it in a box, I think, which some experiences as a human just cannot be put in a box. But yeah, I love
Especially
how you.
with plant medicines. They don't fit those super neat and boxes from Western knowledge, because they mix spirituality, healing, therapy, culture, and they defy those very strict and rigid categories. But even when they tried science, I feel like at this point they try to explain, for instance, the power of faith. They always go back to some sort of like biological argument or explanation. They have faith and that alters your self-esteem, and that's give you confidence, and that produces hormones, and those hormones produce endorphin, and then you're feeling better, and then they always try to kind of go through a chemical biological explanation of some form of healing that they cannot fully understand. Another issue that I find important is that for some traditions, you can have healing without curing necessarily a disease. For instance, psychedelics have helped a lot of people with terminal diseases in coping, in understanding, their process, in finding peace, in finding acceptance, and that can be also seen as a form of healing. I also like, there's a very interesting story from Santo Daime, one of the early members. He had like these sores on his legs, and he could never heal them. They were there like forever. He suffered for decades, and he could never find the root of the problem, and could never find, the cure. And one time he drank ayahuasca, he drank Santo Daime, and he asked, why can't I heal from this sores in my legs? Because he saw other people go through miracle healings. And at some point, he had a vision that in a former life he was a slave master, and he caused a lot of injuries and a lot of pain to a lot of people, and those sores were a karmic lesson for him. They will never go away. That was something that he had to go through, endured through his whole existence in order to kind of burn this karma that he acquired from another life. And that gave him a healing, because that gave him an understanding of the process. He accepted, he understood, so he didn't try to fix it, to cure it anymore. And he made peace with it. So sometimes healing can come without curing the illness per se. And that's something that psychedelics can really do to people. So that's another thing, in Western science, if you're not cured, you're living with that, and they're always trying to fight the causes of the disease. But sometimes healing can go beyond just curing the physical illness.
Wow, I've never looked at it that way. That is really beautiful. Well, I think I have heard of a story of someone dying and ayahuasca has helped them accepting their death or something. I think I've heard that before. So it's maybe similar, but wow, that is mind blowing. I think that's so beautiful. Yeah, I think the way that we have been conditioned, I have my own theories on how society is set up now, but I don't think it's natural to humans at all. So I want to talk a little bit to you about the anthropological aspect of this, because I think the Chacruna Institute that you work for, or volunteer for, I don't know, they do look more at the anthropological side as well, right? So can you talk a little bit about? I mean, you're in Brazil. I assume you're Brazilian. So, what do you know about the culture of ayahuasca, for example, or of plant medicines or psychedelic medicines, and how do you feel like it has evolved over time, and what kind of trends are you seeing? What kind of studies are you, or maybe I don't know, what kind of conversations are you having about that?
Yes, I am an anthropologist by formation. My PhD, my masters are in anthropology. But I've researched mainly the regulation of ayahuasca, the political aspects of, how ayahuasca became legal, regulated in Brazil. But there are a lot of, it's hard to find out, where and how ayahuasca began. There are some people that some archaeologists try to pinpoint kind of an approximate, date. Uh, what uh, what I think we know for sure is that it goes at least a lot of centuries, and it was a practice that was part of the traditions of a lot of indigenous groups from the Amazon. And the Amazon extends not only in Brazil. You have it ayahuasca in Brazil, in Peru, in Bolivia, in Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela. You can find it, those plant species. And so they go centuries old, the use of ayahuasca. And now what we see is a different moment, even in the indigenous use of ayahuasca. In Brazil, there's a very strong political and cultural movement from the indigenous people that is make that it's kind of been propelled by ayahuasca. In 2025, we had the fifth Indigenous Ayahuasca Conference. They're organizing themselves politically to fight for land demarcation, for the preservation of environment, to fight in commodification, exploitation, what they call the unresponsible uses of ayahuasca. But ayahuasca is changing a lot. For instance, a lot of groups, there are indigenous groups that did ayahuasca and stopped using ayahuasca because of the colonization and the missionaries, and they took it back again and re-encounter ayahuasca. There are some indigenous groups that never historically, we don't have any information that they have used ayahuasca, and they started using ayahuasca through the influence of ayahuasca religions or other groups. So it's a very new thing. For instance, in Santo Daime, we have a collective use of ayahuasca. Everybody drinks in the ayahuasca ceremony. The leader of the ceremony, the musicians, the men, the women, even the guardians, the people responsible of taking care of the people, everybody drinks it. And in a lot of indigenous contexts, it was just something strictly reserved for the shaman, what we call pajé, and maybe his relatives, his son, his apprentices. There wasn't a lot of the groups there. They didn't do a collective use of ayahuasca. Women were not allowed to drink ayahuasca in a lot of indigenous settings. So people trying to tend to romanticize and think that every indigenous person did ayahuasca, and it wasn't nothing like that. And there are some traditions that you can find a collective use of ayahuasca, something more like cultural and social, but mainly was restricted to a few people. And I know, for instance, I forgot the name of the indigenous group, but I talked from the Amazon. And I said, "Do you guys drink ayahuasca?" And he said, "Only the shaman and his family. It would be considered like blasphemy for other people to drink ayahuasca." And we see now with these new moments that there are a lot of like people, the collective use of ayahuasca is picking up, the women protagonism, women doing the diets that was reserved for the men, that to prepare to become a healer, to become a student of the plant medicines. The women protagonism is super strong right now when it comes to ayahuasca, the collective uses. There are new forms of art aesthetic going on. For instance, the incorporation of classical guitar, that was something very common in Santo Daime. We use the musicality of Santo Daime. We have classical guitars. They incorporated the classical guitar, but they played differently, different rhythms, different cadences. And so now they have, let's say, modern indigenous ayahuasca songs, but they still have some traditional also ayahuasca songs sung a cappella. So we're seeing it's a very something very new, and ayahuasca is being kind of a propeller of this new boom, this cultural, political, economical movement that's taking shape in the Amazon.
Yeah, I want to ask you later as well about the all the ayahuasca or like plant medicine tourism that also, as you said, brings a lot of like issues as well to the local communities, as I understand, and it's also being overused. And I think that's kind of like I don't think everyone should do ayahuasca. I don't think everyone should do anything. I don't think anything is for everyone. I mean, I don't know, maybe you disagree, but I don't think just because you hear about it necessarily you're called to do the medicine, right? But I think that's an interesting thing we can talk about too. But I wanted to ask you about okay, so I've watched like some documentaries years ago. Maybe I'm mixing things up, but I think it was in Peru, and they did like ayahuasca ceremony, and there's like women, I think it's mostly women who paint. Don't quote me on this, but I think they paint these like what do you say, like these patterns and shapes that have to do also with the singing. I think they're singing and painting and doing the ceremony and drinking ayahuasca. And it's somehow people who do ayahuasca, they all report seeing these patterns that these women are also painting. So what do you think that is? Are you guys doing that as well in Brazil? And what is that? Because I'm a painter too. I mean, I paint as well. And I'm just interested in what are they picking up?
I think ayahuasca kind of breaks with traditional Western notions of what art is, but because art is a composition, you sit down, you think, I'm gonna write this down, I'm gonna compose this song, I'm gonna do this painting. And for instance, the Santo Daime songs and the Indigenous Icarus, the ayahuasca songs, they're not composed, they are received in the force of ayahuasca, in the force of Santo Daime. Nobody sits down, I'm gonna compose a hymn, a ayahuasca song. It's something that is received. You're like a radio receiving this message, from the spiritual world, and you're only transmitting it. And your goal is to learn the song. It comes with words, it comes with a melody. So this notion of a composition, it's very unusual in these realms, and the art goes the same. The paintings comes from the visions, and the songs come from the visions, from the force, from the spiritual realm. They're not as like a Western artist sitting down getting inspiration, I'm gonna compose. It's something like you're like the medium. You're a radio, you're something, the device where in which this force transmits itself and materializes into the world. So it's a very different approach to art, to what composition is, to what music is. And I actually think about it because in psychedelic assisted therapy, I've seen a lot of works focusing on the role of music, but it's different because they think about music as kind of this accessory thing, something to create an ambience, to relax you, to create a better environment, something to lighten the mood, to help you in the journey. And for some traditions, the ayahuasca songs, the Santo Daime hymns, they are as important as the drink itself. And for some traditions, they are considered more important than the drink. And there are no healing ceremonies without the combination of the songs, the chants, the dancing. So it's not something that can be isolated. So I feel that, in psychedelic assisted therapy, music is seen as something, as an accessory, something that it's, setting the mood. And in this traditional settings, the song is not at first, is not a composition, is received by the spiritual realm, and it's integral for the ceremony, for the healing. Without the songs, there can be no healing, there can be no ceremony, and they are as important, if not more important, than the drink itself, ayahuasca. So it's a different relationship to, and different notions of what art is, what composition is, the role of music. It's a complete different relationship. And to address your question about the retreats, and this new scenario, there depends on the group. There are a lot of groups in Brazil that are promoting festivals. They are receiving non-indigenous people. Some of them are open even to teach maybe some ayahuasca songs, to teach them, even to give the authorization for them to maybe perform a ceremony in the city. But that depends on the group. Some groups are more open and some groups are not. And that could be as a form of creating alliances, allyship, to expand your network, to have more friends, more allies, more partners that are going to support your cause. They bring also economic, prosperity, and that helps a lot. We live in a material world, and these people need a lot of things that they can't plant everything they need. Sometimes they need Western medicines, they need, a motor for their boats, they need, fuel, they need a lot of things. Sometimes they have a really hardship and struggle to make ends meet and to get their sustainability, especially now with the climate crisis. They're the most impacted, but we also see some more like exploitation settings, so this kind of retreats, these luxury retreats for like upper middle class white Americans and Europeans who come just seeking their personal healing journey. And the indigenous people have to leave their homes, their culture, their setting, and perform these tailor-made, ceremonies for the gringos, for the Westerners, the foreigners, sing personally songs for each person there, then making not a lot of money and being quite literally exploited. So they're the two sides of the coin. Ayahuasca can be a tool for creating new alliances to promote, the demarcation of lands, to promote economic prosperity. For instance, there's an artistic movement from the Hunikuin people called Maku, and their goal is like sell paintings to buy land. And they did, art exhibitions in MASP, which is one of the major museums in Brazil and internationally. So it's not it's something like, clear cut or black or white. It has a lot of, shades of gray and a lot of contradictions. Although it has this component of, prosperity, but it also has a lot of exploitation going on.
Interesting, because I've heard mostly about the exploitation, so I've heard less about the prosperity aspect actually, but that's really cool how you broke that down, both sides of it. Yeah, it's not black or white, I assume, but the way you described the channeled messages that the artists basically are painting are channeled, like they're tuning into the frequency of the plant medicine, and they are bringing that into paper or cloth. And I love that so much. It's again such a holistic way of looking at something. Like even the music that you said, it's part of the ceremony. It's almost sometimes more important than the ayahuasca. And so I love that. And I do think though that like I consider myself a spiritual artist as well. So I feel like when I paint, even if I get inspirations from things and social media or other artists, I still channel. Like I do think it's coming through me. So I think every artist in any way, even this right now, right? Like this is for me art too. Like we are channeling a message together. So yes, we are talking, but I do think because we are all like a collective consciousness, we are tuning in and out of these frequencies and these like energies. And I think we're bringing forth a message that is meant to be heard at this right moment in time for the person who's perceiving it. So I kind of look at it very holistically anyways. So I really resonated with what you said with the setting and the music and the art. And I think that's so cool. Do you feel like again, sorry about the art. I just find it interesting. But the paintings that these people are painting, do you feel like it has healing frequencies of the plant medicine incorporated into the painting?
I'm not an expert on that, but I would say probably yes, because those frequencies, those shapes, those geometrical forms, they're not random. They're there for a reason, and they're channeled, as you said. And I feel like some artists really do channel things. I like watching documentaries, and sometimes you see an artist say, "Oh, this song came like out of nowhere," like I composed it like in 30 seconds. It was almost, if it was not me, I was channeling something. But there are sometimes they need to finalize an album, and they have to struggle and really compose and sit down and write lyrics and do that. We don't see that in traditional forms of art. You always channeling. If you're not channeling, you're not doing it right. You're forcing the issue. It has to come naturally, or else it doesn't have the spiritual strength. It doesn't have the healing strength. And I feel that the painting, as the songs, they have a healing potential as well. But as I said, the paintings are more exclusive to some certain indigenous traditions. We don't have those types of artistic expressions in Santo Daime. We channel in Santo Daime the songs, but I see that there's a relationship between, those different expressions, because you're channeling something that doesn't come from you, that comes from a different realm, a different domain, and you have to be in the right mood, in the right, with the attitude, with the right energy to receive the message. It's like, if you're like, I always like the metaphor of a radio. Every radio can receive, but if your frequency is not aligned with, you can be shuffling from and just hearing, noises. But if you find you know, the right frequency, you can channel this beautiful song. So it's kind of, a combination of factors, I think, and not everybody channels, and I don't think that's necessarily something bad or not. Some people have more, are easier. It comes easier for certain people than to others, but everybody can benefit from the channelings of other people. Everybody can receive the healing from a song that was channeled by a shaman or a padrinho in Santo Daime. So I think once it is channeled, the message has a life on its own. It goes beyond the person that channeled. It almost as it has a life on its own.
That's a really beautiful way of saying that. I think that's anything, right? Like, let's say you say something to a friend and that message moves them. It also has a ripple effect of, into other places and things that you would have maybe not thought about. I love how you said that. I wanted to ask you as well about tobacco. So I know a lot of these shamans, they do use tobacco, right? Like pure tobacco, like tobacco leaves. I'm not too well versed on that, but do you know anything about the ritual, traditional use of tobacco?
There's an intimate relationship between ayahuasca and tobacco in the Amazon, be it smoking, or they use a lot of a powder form called snuff. We call it rapé, which is you pound the tobacco with different plants, and you create this very thin powder, and they use it sometimes with what they call curipi, which is kind of these pipes where you can put the rapé into one. They're kind of like V-shaped, and you put the rapé here and put it in your nose, and somebody's gonna blow it in your nose. So there's the powder form that is very utilized between indigenous people, and it's cutting up in Santo Daime as well. It's very common, but you can I know also stories and groups that use tobaccos tobacco smoke, for instance, cooking ayahuasca, and they blow tobacco smoke on the pot that is cooking ayahuasca. Master Irineu, the founder of Santo Daime, he used to do something for when people ask for Santo Daime, people who are sick. Sometimes he would do that as well. He would uh, blow tobacco smoke in the Santo Daime glass, and he had like a glass full of Santo Daime. He would and close it down and give it to the person to drink. So there's a very intimate relationship between these two plants, be it in the form of smoke, be it in the form of powder. And but every group has different ways of using, of preparing. So it's not something that it's like there's a consensus on how to do it or the properties.
Okay, because I wanted to know as well, do you know what the spiritual use of tobacco is there in these ceremonies? If you know of any, like why do they use it? Why do they use tobacco? For what exactly? And what is the spiritual properties of the tobacco?
It's the same thing, I believe, as ayahuasca. It's a plant medicine that has its own healing properties, its healing energy, and it can cure as well. And mixed with ayahuasca, it can potentialize the healing. For instance, in the rapé, the powder, there are a lot of people that throw up, that they cleanse, they vomit, they cleanse their body, and they feel the strength of the which is not only material, a spiritual strength and the healing energy, but there's also some kind of the current use. Even rapé can be used as Westerns use tobacco, and it can be used as something that loses its spiritual and kind of potency and spiritual properties if it's not done correctly. So, according to a lot of indigenous people that I've talked to, it's not only on the substance. That's why those notions of substance are kind of tricky when it comes to other traditions, because they say if you abuse it, you're only gonna have the addiction and you won't have the benefits, you won't have the healing, because the spirit doesn't like to be abused. It doesn't like when people go to it often and often and often without purpose, without intent, without knowledge. So tobacco, like ayahuasca, is seen as a different plant, a plant medicine with spiritual powers as well. But like coca leaves, that has a lot of also power, and it's considered sacred for a lot of cultures in the Andes. And but it can also be misused in the form of cocaine. So it always depends on how it's used, in what context, for what purposes, how frequent. And so even the strongest medicine can become a poison as well.
Yeah, that's so deep. I love that. How you broke that down. That's so important because you can literally use something that can be the ultimate healing for one person. The other person, if they abuse it, it can be their demise. And so we have to have so much discernment when we look at these things. It's not black or white again, right? Like, when are we using it? Why are we using it? Are we using it in ceremony? Are we using it for fun? Are we using it for fun every day? Are we using it for fun once a year? Like, there's so many different ways. Like, even the way that tobacco has been, I mean, such a perversion of what has happened to tobacco in the whole world, right? Like cigarettes. That's such a different way of what I guess the tobacco plant is, in these indigenous cultures is used for, is so different. I mean, of course, as you said, some people do get addicted and they do abuse it as well, but um, as well with the coca that you mentioned
Yeah.
as well, super interesting. Yeah.
They say the tobacco cigarettes cause, certain, like, thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths per year. But I think it's easy to put the blame on the plant. because the problem is not the plants themselves. The problem is our compulsive culture, our compulsive behavior, and that can be with anything, with chocolates, with porn, with relationships, with sex, with food, with any substance. We're in a very compulsive culture where we want to, we want the pleasure, we want it now, we want it as often as we can. And I think that's the kind of the root of the issue. It's easy to blame the substance, to blame the drug, to blame the plant, to blame, and not address, how our patterns, our cultural historical patterns have been created, because the use of psychoactive substances have been going on for centuries, for millennia, but the drug problem is a modern problem, is a problem that came with Western societies. There was no drug problem before Western society, and it's accompanied with all forms of compulsive behavior that are not good for health, for our lives as well.
Yeah, I think it's a coping mechanism. And I think the world right now, just like the pharmaceutical industry, is all about easing pain, coping with the pain. So that's, I believe, what is at the root of all addiction is, of course, it's trauma. And in my opinion, it's trauma and, a reason why people don't want to feel. So if you want to get away from feeling, you use a specific, drug, a specific, anything that, to get away from that feeling, to get away from the pain. And I think maybe that's also why plant medicine such as ayahuasca can be such powerful healers for people with addictions, because now you're finally there to look at the root. Now you're finally there to look at why you even want to smoke, or why you even want to drink alcohol, why you even want to, whatever people are doing, right? So yeah, it's a big coping mechanism. It's horrible. People are in so much pain. I do get it though. So I do not judge anyone who is an addict, or, because I understand that. I think nowadays, I mean, there's almost no, thank God there are like, places like the institute you work for, who are trying to, inform people and like help people. But I think if you live in the Western world or in a Western type of society, like I live in Japan, I live in the East, but this is a very Western or very, I guess, industrialized, I don't know what to say, even like society where it's similar, right? It's similar everywhere. It's similar to Europe. It's similar to North America. So I think it's difficult sometimes in these societies that we live in for a normal person, for the average person to even have access to this information. So yeah, that's also why I wanted to have you on. But the time is already crazy. But I wanted to ask you, for anyone who doesn't know what a shaman is, because I think people really, especially people who have a very scientific or I want to say skeptic mindset, people might not know how much knowledge and experience goes into becoming a shaman. Can you tell people what a shaman is, or even if you have some experience, with them, working with them, like what type of people are shamans and what do they do?
Sure. Just before that, I wanted just to address something that you said, because I think you're right. The idea of coping. I don't blame, I really think that drug abuse is something very serious. It's not something that should be treated as a law problem, as something that criminalized. Those people are bums, they don't want to get jobs. It's something that can start as fun or a way of coping with pain, and then it can take a hold of your life, and it really strips you, from yourself. And we have to treat these people, we have to give them means to heal themselves. And when people just say, stop doing drugs, but if the person is homeless, if the person doesn't have friends, doesn't have a support network, doesn't have a place to live, doesn't have a work, doesn't how can a person, quit the addiction, quit, if we don't give them the necessary support. And I feel that we are a long way from really, treating drug abuse with the seriousness that it deserves, and stop treating with the stigma of criminality, or of these people. They're lazy, they're bums, they don't want to do, they're suffering. It's a different type of suffering, and but we need to address it with seriousness. So that's one thing that I wanted to point out. And another thing that you said, that I feel that Western society, I have this anthropologist called Talal Assad that I really like, and he problematizes, how our society, Western society, treats the economics of pain and pleasure. We always have to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Pleasure is always something good, something that it's good for us, and the pain is something that we always have to avoid at all costs. All pain is bad. So, and he says that, for instance, in certain traditions, the pain is not necessarily something bad, And for instance, there are some rituals where people would walk into coal, like burn their feet, or they would, like, do the weeping and things like that, because feeling a pain could be a form of transcendency as well. You have the indigenous people that put like hooks on themselves. So there are some traditions where there is no clear-cut, division between pain and pleasure. They come together. The transcendence comes with also feeling some sort of pain. And I think that our society wants to eliminate all forms of pain and treat them as negative, or unless they are inserted in some sort of economy of pain. No pain, no gain. I'm going to the gym because I want to work out and I'm going to be super strong, or I'm going to win the World Cup, or I'm going to have pain to do a tattoo because that's going to make me pretty. That pain is understandable for Western society, because there's a goal. I want to be prettier. I want to be, stronger. I want to be a champion. But if it's something like a pain to go through a religious ceremony to ascend, it's considered, accessory. It's considered, as something that is not good. And we have also that kind of notion. So that I wanted to kind of put my anthropological perspective, but now to shamanism and to the shamans. People, we see a lot nowadays, people try to become shamans like overnight, and they go and they do like a 2 week retreat, or like a monthly retreat, and they learn some things about plant medicines, and they want to be healers, facilitators, and things like that. And that's something that a lot of people, and especially indigenous people, see with a lot of skepticism, because in a lot of traditions, the shaman, it doesn't want to be a shaman. It is he's born a shaman. He's kind of recognized as a shaman while in his mother's womb. And when, from the moment he's born to he's an adult, he's always learning. He's treated differently. He started working with plants at a young age. It's a life's work. It takes a life to go through very strict diet, sometimes 2 3 months without eating sugar, salt, any condiments, being away from people, from your family. So it's a very difficult path. It's not something easy, and it's not something that a person can choose to be or not. It's something that it's almost like a spiritual mission, a calling that the person is born into. So I feel that when people, a lot of, but then this quickness, this quick fix, I did like a 2 week retreat and now I'm gonna be this facilitator. I'm giving plant medicine. I think it always goes with our Western, ways of everything needs to be fast and everything needs to be quick. People don't want to go through the troubles of studying. And if you consider, for instance, the academy, for you to be a professor at a university, you have to go to kindergarten, elementary school, high school, college, master's, PhD, postdoctoral fellowships, and then like 20 years later, 30 years later, you're ready to become a professor. and people want to jump, I think, jump some steps, and they feel like, okay, I'm just gonna do this retreat or do this, and now I'm ready to facilitate, to give psychedelic plant medicines. And I think that's kind of one of the roots of the problems, because those substances, are no joke. They're not toys, they're not party things that you can just simply take. They're very serious things, and if they're not done, even if done properly, you can have serious issues such as psychotic breakdowns and things like that. They're not risk free by any means, but especially if it's done by people that are not responsible, that don't have the appropriate knowledge, the risk increases substantially. So that's something that the indigenous people see with very cautions caution, and they're very skeptical about this rise of new shamans, new healers, because, as they say, it's something that takes a life's work, dedication to this practice, and it's not something that can be learned overnight or over a course or even over a month or two or a year. And so I feel that the need, I think we need to address, why people feel the need to be healers. Where those does it come from, a mission, or does this come from an ego place, an ego trip, an ego perspective, where I want to be this great healer and I'm gonna be considered this powerful guru and things like that. I feel that there's a lot of ego trip in this kind of, proliferation of new shamans.
Yeah, interesting. And I also heard some people from the Western world, going into the jungle and doing the ceremony, but actually ending up with people who aren't really shamans, who just pretend to be shamans, but because they look indigenous, physically, that people get tricked, and even women getting sexually abused, and all of these things that can happen, right? And you open yourself up so vulnerably when you do this medicine. Like, I mean, so much can go wrong. Honestly, I don't even know how people just I don't know how people just do it. I don't know. I guess you should really do your research. Whoever is watching and whoever wants to do this or feels called to do this medicine, even if it's people from the same country, right? I mean, you should always do your research and know where you're going and what you're putting your faith into, who you're putting your faith into. So that's so important, I think. And I think there's a lot of
Yes, it's
confusion.
yes, it's
Yeah.
very important, to know where you're stepping into, knowing the tradition, getting referrals from other people as well, making sure that you're being initiated with experienced people, with a lot of knowledge, with respect, with ethics, because, as I said, I say a lot in Chakruna, people tend to romanticize the psychedelic universe and think that it's like a huge fairy tale and bed of roses, but there's a lot of abuses that goes on in medical, in psychedelic medicine, in indigenous settings, in religious settings as well. Abuses are part of humanity. You can find it in every institution, in universities, schools, in jobs, in the market, everywhere. There are different forms of abuse: economical abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. And the ayahuasca universe is no different. That's why in Chacruna we also have a guide for sexual harassment. I recommend people that go to our website chacruna.net if they want to learn more about this topic, because we created this guide on awareness on sexual abuse and how to prevent it, and the way, not like it says prevent it is like 100% risk free, but what kind of measures that you can take to minimize the risks of abuse, especially when you're going to intercultural settings, because you're going to a different country with a different tradition, with an indigenous group. They have different gender roles, they have different notions of what is consent and what is not. So it's important to be very informed and to know where you're going and to, to minimize the risks. But I think a lot of this is kind of the fetishization and romanticization by Westerners of indigenous people. They see as the good savage. They picture them as living like, this harmonious life with nature and as good people. And they're like almost like these living saints that, the snakes and the birds just come and talk to them. And they're in a form, they're just people like us, and in every group there's a lot of, different people, and abuses can happen. And I think part of I'm not trying to blame the victim, but I feel that, we need also a more grounded attitude when we come to indigenous people. There's a lot of romanticization, fetishization, and people, try to see them as these illuminated beings that are gonna bring my healing to fruition. And it's nothing like that. There are people like us, they have struggles like us, they have problems like us, maybe not the same problems, not the same issues, but they're still human beings. We live in the same planet. They're not by any means, this form of,
Enlightened, always
yeah,
enlightened. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
for sure.
exactly.
It's so true. I mean, like I see that everywhere. I live in Japan. I see it in like obviously I see it with tourists here as well, and it's like yeah, I'm like in and out of it. Like, yeah, sometimes I'm like, wow, like, can we look at every culture and respect it and see it as a beautiful thing? Yes. But then also, can we tune in with ourselves and be like, no, but this aspect of this culture is actually shit and it doesn't really, it isn't really good for my health. So I will say no to that. Like, I think people always look at things like either good or bad, evil or good, or white and black. Like, no, like things are very complex and there are problems in each culture. And, like, yeah, this has to be said about every tourist, to every tourist. And I think cultural relativity is a big thing that I think about so much because I used to be a flight attendant. So I've traveled the world and I've lived in so many different cultures. I'm also like, yeah. So I think about that a lot. And I think people are too one-sided when they often when they look at other cultures, and it's the fascination and how different it is, and they kind of get lost in that when it's not all roses, right? As you said. So
Yes.
thank you so much. At the end of my interviews, I actually do like a rapid round. So I want you to just answer very shortly to a few questions that I'm gonna ask you, or with one word. So, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you hear ayahuasca?
Healing.
What is the most surprising thing you have learned from ayahuasca?
My mistakes.
What's one myth about psychedelics that you wish would disappear?
Abuses.
What is a book that everyone who's exploring consciousness should read, or exploring plant medicines? Do you have a book?
Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda.
What is love to you?
Partnership.
I love that. This was so beautiful. Henrique, thank you. This is so fun. So interesting.
Thank you.
All of the topics.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's always good to spread the word, spread the gospel of psychedelics. Just wanna give a shout out to people to check the Chacruna Institute, our website, chacruna.net, and our conference in April. I think it's April 17th and 18th in San Francisco, Psychedelic Culture 2026. Check us out online and feel free to get in touch with us. That's it.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I will put everything in the video description below. And thank you so much for being my guest. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you guys so much for listening and watching to this week's episode. Consider subscribing, liking, sharing. It helps a lot. I'm a small channel, so we're trying to grow here, and I hope you guys liked it. Please tell me your thoughts in the comments, and see you guys next week. Bye.